We've all heard of a place called hell, and I'd submit that most of us understand hell to be a place of eternal torment for the unrepentant. The concept is branded into the cultural fabric of the West, and virtually every Christian believes such a place exists. Most people don't even question it. The King James Version of the Bible includes the word hell more than 60 times. That's proof enough. A burning place called hell absolutely must be true. There's no point in questioning it. That's perhaps what we might tell ourselves. But what if we're wrong about that? What if hell isn't what we've been told it is? What if hell is nothing more than the horrifying daydreams of the Dark Ages? These are the questions I asked myself when I started investigating this topic. Something just never really sat well with me about an all-loving God sending most of his creation into a burning torture chamber for all eternity. And so I decided to find out for myself what the Bible really had to say on the matter. I started my journey by looking for the word hell in the Hebrew and Greek scriptures, and I discovered that it was suspiciously missing. As a literary nerd, I knew that translated works, including the Bible, must be checked against the original language in which it was written. I eventually found that the word hell is an Old English word with a Germanic origin, and it means to cover or hide. It's where we get the word helmet, which is used to cover, hide, or protect one's head. How could a word most people believe to mean eternal torment actually just mean to cover, like a helmet or a hat? I wanted to know more. So I purchased a copy of Strong's Exhaustive Concordance to find exactly which Hebrew and Greek words were translated hell in our English Bibles. It turns out that there are 4 words in the King James Version translated hell. Whether through ignorance or malicious intent, it seemed that the English translators utterly failed to accurately translate these 4 distinct terms. I was frustrated and angry when I figured this out. These translators' mistakes have caused untold confusion and psychological pain to those who have been told they are eternally damned if they don't get right with God. And then I imagine children terrified to death that unless they believed in God, they were destined to spend eternity in a flame-ridden torture chamber away from their parents. I couldn't think of a worse fate than that. I told myself that surely this isn't how the engineer of the universe works. Surely humans are not burned alive forever for their unbelief. That seemed absurd to me. So I kept digging. I found that the 4 words translated hell in the King James Version were Sheol, Hades, Gehenna, and Tartarus. The Hebrew word Sheol is translated hell 31 times in the Old Testament. I expected to find passages about flames and demons around this word, but I didn't. Sheol is a pretty harmless word. It means the grave. No fire, no demons, no eternity. None of that. Just the grave. The same went for the Greek word Hades. Even though Hades is translated hell in the New Testament, it's synonymous with the Hebrew word Sheol. Again, I found that it wasn't a place of eternal torment. It was, again, just the grave. It was where people go when they die. In the biblical context, this provided psychological relief. The next Greek word I found to be translated hell was Gehenna. This is a word that a lot of Christians like to use to drive home the idea of eternal torment, because in Mark chapter 9, verses 44 and 45, it reads, "And if thy hand offend thee, cut it off. It is better for thee to enter into life maimed than having 2 hands to go into hell, into the fire that never shall be quenched, where their worm dieth not, and the fire is not quenched." I wanted to know more about this place called Gehenna. It's clearly not a place people go when they die. It's not the grave. It's not Sheol. It's not Hades. And when I dug a little deeper, I understood that Gehenna was a literal place during the biblical times. It was called the Valley of Hinnom. It still exists today as a beautiful park outside Jerusalem. And nothing really happens there. But during the reign of King Solomon, children were apparently sacrificed by being burned in the Valley of Hinnom to the Ammonite god Moloch. Dr. E.W. Bullinger's critical lexicon suggests that the valley was so named not because of Moloch worship, but because of the carrion that was burned there after the time of idol worship. When I looked at the context of the word Gehenna in the Bible, I found that Jesus was talking to those who believed who he was, both disciples and followers. He wasn't even addressing unbelievers or non-Israelites when he used the word Gehenna. Jesus was definitely trying to communicate something by using the word, but it doesn't appear to have anything to do with eternal hellfire. And the final Greek word translated hell is Tartarus. My concordance indicated that it is only used once in the New Testament, in 2 Peter 2:4. The interesting thing about Tartarus is that there's no mention of humans being there. Not once, not ever. The verse suggests the only ones there are, quote, angels that sinned, close quote. But again, there's no mention of hellfire and demons that eat your flesh. The Bible, it seems to me, is free from the horrible idea of hellfire. But the idea is very real and persistent throughout Christian history. The first person that comes to my mind is Dante, in his very long poem called Inferno. I investigated the poem. I looked over its words, their meanings and its imagery, and almost none of what Dante dreamed up in that poem reflects what the Bible really says about the underworld. The Inferno is absolutely an important part of literary history, but it is wholly lacking in biblical accuracy. Many Bible teachers throughout history have understood the true meaning of the words translated hell in our English Bibles, but they have either been ignored or condemned as heretics. Even though it's beyond the scope of this video, I'd like to suggest that the idea of eternal torture is nothing more than pagan hysterics that Christianity took on as its own sometime soon after the books of the Bible were written. But much of the damage has already been done. The fictional concept of hell has rooted itself deep in our cultural consciousness. Idioms such as "until hell freezes over" and "it's hot as hell outside" were at one time common utterances in casual conversation. Some have leveraged hell for financial gain. The first thing that comes to mind is Bill Wise's book, 23 Minutes in Hell. I've read the book, and despite its provocative title and popularity, nothing within its pages reflected what is really written in the Bible. Literally nothing. American televangelist Creflo Dollar has also leveraged hell and preyed upon people's fears for financial gain. He once taught on a series on what he believed hell to be, and honestly, one can't help but see the absurdity of the whole thing. Here's a short snippet of the lengthy segment. But again, the Bible doesn't mention anything featured in Dollar's segment. It's pure fiction meant to scare and terrify listeners. I don't know how much money Dollar made off his segment, but I'm sure it was more than we think. And he's not the only so-called Christian who has pushed this message. The truth is that the message of an eternal place of conscious torment is a lucrative business. The concept of hell is powerful. That's the crux of the matter. It's a very powerful method of bringing people into submission, especially in the realms of politics and religion. Polybius, the ancient historian, provided a good explanation for the concept of rewards and punishments after death. He said, quote, "Since the multitude is ever fickle, full of lawless desires, irrational passions, and violence, there is no other way to keep them in order but by the fear and terror of the invisible world, on which account our ancestors seem to me to have acted judiciously, when they contrived to bring into the popular belief these notions of the gods and of the infernal regions," close quote. Seneca, the famous Stoic, said that, quote, "those things which make the infernal regions terrible, the darkness, the prison, the river of flaming fire, the judgment seat, are all a fable, with which the poets amuse themselves, and by them agitate us with vain terrors," close quote. Sextus Empiricus, the Pyrrhonist, called such ideas poetic fables of hell, and Cicero referred to them as silly absurdities and fables. Even though these ideas were recognized as insane and absurd in ancient times, that didn't stop well-known Christian theologians from carrying the torch of eternal hell, cementing it as a cornerstone of post-life torture. Calvinist Jonathan Edwards said, "The world will probably be converted into a great lake or liquid globe of fire, in which the wicked shall be overwhelmed, which will always be in tempest, in which they shall be tossed to and fro, having no rest day and night, vast waves and billows of fire continually rolling over their heads, of which they shall forever be full of a quick sense within and without. Their heads, their eyes, their tongues, their hands, their feet, their loins, and their vitals shall forever be full of a flowing, melting fire, fierce enough to melt the very rocks and elements. And also, they shall eternally be full of the most quick and lively sense to feel the torments. Not for 1 minute, not for 1 day, not for 1 age, not for 2 ages, not for 100 ages, not for 10,000 millions of ages, one after another, but forever and ever, without any end at all, and never to be delivered. Yet again, he didn't get this from the Bible. He dreamed this up, out of his own imaginations that he hoped would happen to his enemies. I submit here that Edwards's ideas about post-life punishment reveals more about his mental and spiritual disposition than anything else. John Calvin himself had the following to say about future punishment. Forever harassed with a dreadful tempest, they, unbelievers, shall feel themselves torn asunder by an angry God and transfixed and penetrated by mortal stings, terrified by the thunderbolts of God and broken by the weight of his hand, so that to sink into any gulf would be more tolerable than to stand for a moment in these terrors. Calvin was known to have his theological enemies set aflame on slow-burning wood, thus making the suffering more intense before their ultimate death. But there's a silver lining to all of this. The word hell is going away in mainstream Bible translations, and there are even some Bible translations that don't have the word hell printed a single time. These include the Concordant Literal Version, Rotherham's Emphasized Bible, the Emphatic Diaglott, and E.W. Bullinger's Companion Bible. And I'm sure there are others. There are plenty of scholars out there who have tried to share the true words and definitions behind hell, but they have largely been ignored. Whether you are a Christian or not, whether you believe in hell or not, I invite you to research this topic for yourself to see if there's anything to it. Jean-Paul Sartre once said, "Hell is people." And Wittgenstein amended that statement. He said, "Hell isn't people. Hell is yourself." But I'd say, hell isn't people. Hell isn't yourself. Hell's a bad translation for the grave, Valley of Hinnom, and Tartarus. The truth is that we're all going to hell when we die. But don't worry, it's harmless.